Hello, hello, and welcome to another session from the QCraft Ditch Summit, where we are all about, sometimes can seem complicated, but we're going to make it as easy as possible and give you lots of practical ideas. And I'm Matt Miller, the author of Ditch That Textbook. I'm your host, and I am so excited to do today's session because I get to bring you a cult leader. And the cult leader I'm talking about is Jennifer Gonzalez, who has started and maintained the Cult of Pedagogy podcast and blog and all of that. And the thing that I love about what she does is that she takes a lot of the big picture ideas and the things that really drive learning based on research and best practice and all of that, and she makes it understandable and doable and practical. And so that's why I knew we had to have her on here. So now I've kind of already done a little bit of the introduction for you, Jen, but do you want to give everybody just kind of like a quick snapshot of who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So I used to be a long time ago a language arts teacher at the middle school level, and I did that for almost 8 years. And then I started teaching teachers at the college level. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I started learning a little bit of technology, and I learned how to do a blog. And just sort of publishing things. And that's pretty much how it started. I was able to take the passion that I had, teaching pre-service teachers and just continuing to help teachers. And I always thought I would go back to the classroom, but this has turned into a full-time job. So for the last 5 years now, I've just gone at this hard.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are happy that you're doing this as your full-time job, because there's no way that you could create and help in the way that you are right now if you were teaching full-time, right?
No, I would bring home, I don't know, a minimum of 2 to 3 hours of work every night from school. And since that time, I also got 3 kids in my life. So that has also cramped the time. So yeah, if I were to go back to the classroom, my site would just sit there. It would do nothing.
Yep, absolutely.
Nothing. And help more classrooms this way.
Yeah. I totally get that. And I'm glad that you're doing that. So, I know when I go on your site, into the like start now section, it cracks me up every time that I see this, that, you have this little audio file up at the top, and you say that whenever people talk to you about your site, they're like, oh yeah, I love your website, the Cult of, and then they sort of trail off. And so let me pitch it to you real quick. How do you pronounce that word?
Okay, I looked it up when I first started because I knew I had the name down. I say pedagogy, but I went to one of the pronunciation sites and they say pedagogy and pedagogy. And I believe those are both legit. And I used to have that recording where I said, don't say pedagogy, because I thought that was a silly sounding pronunciation. And I was schooled by somebody in the UK who said, no, that is how we say it here.
Oh, wow.
So I changed the recording. And so there are many ways of saying it. It's funny though. My own mother still just calls it the cult. She's just given up.
Oh, really?
She's a very well-spoken woman. I don't know. She's just afraid of saying it wrong, I guess.
Wow. Yeah. And that's interesting because, I've found, we haven't talked about this off air or anything. I'm just pitching this to Jen right now, that, I feel like sometimes the word pedagogy scares teachers a little bit, or they feel like maybe they're not like, or maybe this was just me. I don't know. I may be like projecting my own emotions, but I felt like for a while that this was like for the academics and for people who understood education way more than me. And so I think I didn't touch it because I was kind of afraid of that kind of thing. Do you think there's something to that?
Yeah, I do. That was kind of part of my goal in naming it that, is that I wanted to get the word out there and get it used more. And I see it, and I can't take any credit for this because I have no idea if it had anything to do with me or not, but I hear it all the time now. I hear it in people's podcasts. I hear it and see it in people's blogs. And that just makes me excited because I think as professionals, we should be using that word and knowing what we mean. And the thing is, talking about how much wait time you use, that's pedagogy.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be, analyzing like, I don't know, cooking or something like that. It's, that is the science of what we do. So
Yeah. Yep. No, I totally agree. And yeah, I kind of feel like, for several years as technology became more and more prevalent in the classroom, I feel like professional development took a sharp right turn into the technology space. And we started getting so much, professional learning and conference sessions and entire conferences and everything on technology. And now that technology is a little bit more prevalent, and it's not like we're panicking trying to figure out what in the world we're going to do with it. Yeah. And there's still something to the fact that we're trying to figure out how it fits in society and our lives and everything, and in the classroom. But I feel like now maybe we're starting to slowly veer back into the direction of, let's take a lot of our professional learning and focus it on how we learn and how maybe technology fits into it, but maybe how it doesn't. I think that's maybe our next step. Our next direction is to try to turn it. I'm starting to see a little bit of shift in that direction back towards the good practices of teaching and learning.
Yeah. Well, because most teachers know something about how students learn, and the tech piece is a new thing that's come along. And I feel the same way you do. And in fact, some of the conferences I've been presenting at lately have been about really fine tuning our teacher senses and choosing. I do a session on using backward design to choose your classroom tech. And really, because people always say, start with the learning, but there's really not a lot of frameworks out there for that. Mm-hmm. And so it's really about looking at those learning goals and taking the knowledge that we already have about how students learn and being really, because I feel like in 2018, we're no longer saying like, wow, there's tech out there, you can use it. Now it's at the point where everyone says, yes, we have it now. How can we be really smart and deliberate and thoughtful and systematic about how we select that and use it? So I agree with you.
Yeah, definitely. And so what we're going to talk about today isn't totally tech focused, but I think that you can do a lot of it with tech. So I got this, I was telling Jen offline that I got this kind of like selfish, guilty pleasure, so to speak, of getting to go through her blog and her podcast episodes and find some of the things that she's written about that really resonated with me, so that we can talk about them here. So I've kind of like handpicked some of my favorite topics. She said that there's some of her favorite topics too, when it comes to things that we can do in the classroom. So one of the first ones I wanted to talk about has to do with curation. And I know that with curation, we see it all over the place in our regular lives, and we have to. Pinterest is all about curation. And so we see it there. And with the enormity and the vastness of the internet these days, there's so much stuff out there. And now it's not like, can I collect a bunch of things? It's can I collect the best things that really work for me? And it's really a skill, I think, that kids are going to need, that adults need, but that kids are really going to need going forward. And so, Jen, maybe you can tell us how you see curation fitting into the classroom and how it can be used as a learning tool.
Yeah. So what I'm proposing in this article that you reference is everything that you just said, that we are at the point now where everybody has access to so much information. And one of the things we need to be teaching our students is how to curate. And what I'm proposing in this piece too is that there are actually a lot of great classroom assignments that can come out of the idea of curation. And a lot of it would involve a lot of writing too. So, instead of just having kids look up articles about the civil rights movement, you can, or have them do a report on it where they basically say, Martin Luther King, and, this is what happened. Have them actually take it to scrutinizing different kinds of articles about the civil rights movement to look for things like bias, maybe, and then evaluating them. So, for example, you could have students rank. They could choose 5 articles that have something to do with Martin Luther King, and have them rank them from leaning most biased toward a certain way of looking at him, all the way ranking right down to one that sees him in a different light, whether it's in a positive light or a negative light, or and then they have to sort of write about that. And so they're creating links to these things, but they are actually explaining why they chose these things, what they represent. It's such a different kind of thinking than them just telling you each was. It's them really taking a critical eye to media and processing it at a much higher level. So that's just one example. And I, in the article or in the post, I give a lot of different examples. You know, if you're teaching students a type of literary element, teaching them about metaphor, for example, they could create a playlist of songs that really make good use of metaphor. And so having kids do that kind of an assignment, I don't know. I think I would love it as a student, and I would love getting these back as a teacher, as opposed to just having kids spit back the same facts.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I look at stuff like that too. And I think, it's kind of like what you said. It's more than just fact recall at this point. You know, if you're able to take a resource, you know, take an example of metaphor, like you said, in a song, and then comment on it. I mean, all of a sudden now we're moving up our depth of knowledge levels above just the basic fact recall. And so the critical thinking is definitely there. We're getting kids thinking above that simple, you know, sort of superficial level. And then, you know, we're also helping them, you know, kind of helping them learn how to make smart I don't know. There's just so much all over this. And I love the fact that, kind of like you said, there are lots of ways to fit this into all of these different types of classes, you know?
I want to say one more thing too, because while you're talking, I'm thinking about too, you know, a lot of times we teach kids things. I do want students to know what a metaphor is. And I think one of the best reasons for a person to know what metaphor is to be able to use it in their writing or their speaking or whatever, to tell their stories or to convince people of things, or to, you know, make something beautiful in the world. And so there's a difference between having them identify metaphors in the world and having them say, these are the 10 best uses of metaphors I've seen in songs. Or do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, where it's like, they're like saying, like, I vote for this. There's a big difference between identifying and saying, this is a great example. It's getting them excited about metaphors versus just saying that's what it is.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you a question about curation, then maybe we'll move on to something else. And I think that we've built a pretty good argument for this throughout our discussion already, but I still want to throw it out there because I think that maybe some teachers might look at this and they might think, oh, you know, collecting links to other web pages that other people have created and using that as an assignment. It's like, what are the kids actually doing? You know, how is this actually really learning when, because like, for instance, one of the ways that I propose that we use Google Drawings sometimes is to make it a hub, you know, kind of like an interactive digital poster, so to speak. It's not just a poster where you put the text on there and then that's all that fits, but it's a hub where you can click off to a YouTube video, or you could click off to, you know, another web page that digs into things. And so in that case, it becomes more curation than it is actually just recalling facts. But I could see where teachers might say, if you just make a bunch of links to other stuff, that's a really lazy way of doing research and you're not really doing anything out of it. So speak to that teacher. What would you say to them?
So if that's all the kids are doing, then the assignment was not well constructed. Because one of the things I say in this post is that the best that teachers use for that kind of an assignment is something called eLink, which is just, it's a way of basically creating a beautiful, unique URL to a page that just has the picture, the title of the post, and then some text. You can edit that text. And I'm suggesting that teachers have students use that description of the link. That's what they chose. And for some of these things, it's unlimited. You can even do it in a Google Doc, though. You know, here are the 4 links I chose, and underneath here's a long paragraph about why I chose it. Here's the textual evidence from this thing that you're about to go see. You know, when I write a blog post, if I'm going to write about someone else's article, sometimes I'm going to quote them in that article and then link over to it. Our text. So that text could be this blog post that they're about to link to, or this news article that they're about to link to, but in their curation of it. And that's the art of curation. You're not just saying here.
Right.
You're saying here is what this is, and here's why it's relevant, and here are the implications of it. And this is what I found interesting about it. It's going to be crappy. So that higher order thinking can show itself. It's a writing assignment, really.
Yeah, you're right. And that reminds me, when you said curation is not just here you go, that reminds me of the post you wrote about dumping, about don't be a dumper. I thought that was brilliant. And I've heard multiple people talk about that particular idea, that curation is not just dumping a bunch of stuff in somebody's lap and saying, okay, go make sense of it. And in addition to all of that, as you were talking about what curation should really look like, that also reminds me of Scoop It. The idea of Scoop It is that you take a link to a particular article and then you can write a little summary about what you think about it. I was in love with that idea for the longest time. In fact, I remember Bill Ferreter, who I think he's a teacher in North Carolina. You can find him at Plug Us In on Twitter. He's a great teacher, and I sat in a session of his at a conference where he talked about how his students used Scoop It to basically do what we were talking about. Is they would find resources and then they would put their little summary on it about what they thought of it. It was almost like an annotated bibliography, but cooler, and not just like a document that you turn into your teacher, like we do in literature classes so often. So yeah. All right. So curation is one route that we can go, where we can kick the level of thinking up and really help kids create cooler products that'll matter more to them and help kind of like connect with them on a different level. So I love that. Let's talk about frickin' packets. Can we talk about that?
Frickin' packets.
Right. That was one of the best blog post titles. And can you tell everybody a little bit about the video that sort of spawned all of that?
Yes. I've been wanting to write this post for like well over a year before the time I wrote it, because I saw this video of this student. It's a high school student named Jeff Bliss. And I mean, it's happened to capture in their classroom. It's obviously like clandestine because you can see the angles are all off, but this kid just stands up in the middle of his class. I believe the story goes that his teacher had just said to him, you need to quit complaining about something. I think they were told that they weren't going to have enough time for a test, and he was sort of sticking up for some other student, and he had just had enough, and he stood up and he's just saying, all you guys ever want us to do with these freaking packets. You ask students to learn. Some kids need to learn in different ways. You can't just ask us to sit here day after day and do these freaking packets. So he's walking up to the front of the class and he's like, you need to reach kids' hearts. You need to. And apparently this kid was like, he had dropped out and come back. He was like 19 and a junior. Like he had not had like a smooth academic ride. And, but he made so much sense. And so much, and it spoke to a lot of the teachers that read it. So even though he was being disruptive and disrespectful, you could tell the substance of what he said was just on point. That kids are not learning that way. And so, and I had seen this because I have kids who are in elementary school, and I see the number. I've volunteered at their elementary school. I've photocopied these packets. Learning is being delivered in the form of stapled worksheets. And I mean, the staple really isn't important. It's worksheet teaching, basically.
Right. And
so obviously there's still a whole lot of that going on. And so this post that I wrote was sort of addressing that issue and talking about, the problem is that just because something is printed on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and students are doing something does not make that a bad worksheet. You can do a lot of great things with that sheet of paper. So what I did in this post was I sort of differentiated. One end was I started to call it a busy sheet, just something to keep kids busy. And then at the other end of the continuum, I called it a power sheet. So where it's still a worksheet, but it's actually delivering a lot of instructional value. So to me, the worst kind of busy sheet is like a word search, where I just don't see any value in word searches apart. I've had how to decode and like recognize word patterns. I don't know, but I see it being given to 8th graders on, in a history class. And I'm like, really, that's got nothing to do with learning that. So that to me is the worst kind of busy sheet. Kids are just being kept still. And then on the other end, where it's a power sheet, because I asked on Twitter, I said, what are some good uses of worksheets that you've used and that you've seen? And some people were talking about recording data, that when they're doing like hands-on experiments, they can use it to record and analyze data. while you're writing, or even just to organize the stuff that you're reading about. And so that's a really active learning tool when it's on that end. And then there's a lot of stuff in the middle, which is just,
right.
Yeah. Where a lot.
Yeah. And that's so interesting that you brought that up. I mean, that was basically my next follow-up question, was the fact that you kind of like deconstruct what a worksheet is. And it's like you said, just because it's photocopied doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. The photocopier gets a bad rap a lot of times. And I'm usually standing at the front of the line of people, decrying the photocopier. And there's a lot of things that we can do that are better than making photocopied sheets. But really at the heart of it is the activity, is the path of working through your thoughts and these new ideas and the application that goes with them. And whether you do that on a piece of paper or in a Google Doc or whatever, that's, it doesn't really matter where it is. And I think you would also agree that there are some really egregious uses of technology that feel like worksheets. And just because we're doing them on a Chromebook or on an iPad doesn't make them innovative and doesn't make them any better of learning activities, right?
A lot of expensive tech, actually. Some of the most expensive tech, the big booth tech in the middle of the ISTE floor, a lot of times those are all about delivering content. And I mean, it feels like the Matrix, how I think sometimes the ideal of these kids sitting plugged in and they're basically doing online worksheets. Sort of uninspired rote learning that's happening on the screen, but because it feels like a video game or, whatever, then, it's using tech. And some of our cheapest, most raw types of tech tools, like a lot of the Google apps, I feel are so much better for kids because they have to create things with those things, as opposed to just having a content delivery system where they're just basically on an IV.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. A friend of mine, Troy Cockram, who wrote a book called Firefly Classrooms. I was just talking to him on a podcast interview just recently. And in his book, he had this great quote. He said, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's something to the effect of, if all we're doing is just delivering content, then we're no better than pizza delivery drivers. Yeah. So what are we going to do to actually help kids apply it? And one of the big things I like to talk about is how, holding information in your brain is not going to serve us in the future. It's, how are we going to use that to solve problems? How are we going to use that? What are we going to actually do with it? And just by sitting there and it's kind of like you said with the Matrix, it's like we're just going to plug it into the back of our heads and we're going to download all of that stuff into our brains. And boy, if we're doing that, then we can be outsourced to YouTube and to Khan Academy pretty easily, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so what I talked about too in the post was that, teachers do have a lot of reasons for doing this. We talked about substitute crowd control. I mean, there are teachers in California that have 40 kids in a class and they just have to do something, and that's what they know. And so in this post, I just offered a lot of other suggestions. And I also I don't like the way that we in education are constantly choosing something and then just demonizing it forever. And I think there's a lot of room in education for like a good lecture. It's okay. If kids are going to be doing the occasional worksheet, that's okay if it's well constructed. And so I just don't like it when we create all these absolutes. And that's why I wanted to have that continuum there, because, I mean, even if you're going to have kids color one day, you might just need to do that one day and just keep them busy for a while. Sometimes we go into survival mode.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's value in that, Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, and so maybe we can touch on that idea of the power sheet for just a second. I want to share my screen and put that continuum up there so that people can see it. And then, maybe we'll zoom in on it just a little bit. Which way did it go? There it is. So some of the things that you have on there are graphic organizers, note-taking templates, data collection tools, and planning sheets. And you've touched on these a little bit, but maybe we can come back around to this real quick. And how can we go in the direction, and like it says here, skills practice only as needed and not for a grade. How can we start to move in the direction of power sheets, or maybe what are some good examples, or maybe you can touch on like how we can get away from the busy sheet and move toward the power sheet a little better.
I think actually in that same post, I have a graphic of alternative, what to do instead of packets.
Oh, okay.
And so doing more, if you scroll down just a little bit, doing more of those things is definitely, because I think sometimes teachers are so used to filling up the time with worksheets and packets that they get scared in terms of like, well, what do I do instead of that? And there's sometimes if we don't have paper evidence that students did something, then I think some teachers but not everything has to be graded. And I mean, right now, I feel like one of the best things that we can do for any kid in the 21st century is give them opportunities to talk face to face with other human beings,
Yeah, I totally agree.
And worse at it. And so doing things like a jigsaw activity or a reciprocal learning activity, or, a lot of the stuff on here. I mean, a gallery walk, which I also have stuff on my site called chat stations, which is basically the same thing as a gallery walk. But like, if you've got an idea that you need kids to practice on, let's say it's a math concept, instead of giving them a worksheet with 20 problems on it, you could choose 7 good, challenging problems and put them on the wall around the room separately, and have kids walk around in groups of 3 or 4 and give them 5 minutes to do that together and talk through it, and, see if they come up with the same answer, have them reach consensus on it. And then they're interacting with each other and they're having a slightly more novel experience, and they're still practicing with the math. And you can do that with, passages from a literature piece that you're working on. Foreign language can do that type of thing where you're having short little discussions around the room, and they're still getting that same practice that they would get with a worksheet, but then they're also having conversations with each other. And that's not even necessarily a higher level thing. That's just a way of taking a worksheet and making it just a little bit more interactive. And so that list right there. But I also would rather see teachers doing more long-term projects with kids where they're actually doing some of their own research, or they're doing their own writing, or they're, creating videos about things. And that other stuff is good as a supplement to make sure that they have the skills to do those. But it also drives me crazy when I see kids who already have those skills, but still have to do the same worksheets as everybody.
Right.
Else who don't know how to spell the word "your" correctly, give those 4 kids the worksheet on it. Let everybody else go. Like, no one else is making that mistake, so let them go do something else, something better.
Yeah, you're right. It's that whole cookie cutter mindset. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So, yeah, I love that, and the fact that we've kind of broken down what it is, and yeah, this was one of my favorite posts. So glad we got to talk about that. Let's switch gears just a little bit to something else that I've seen a lot of people talk about, or I've seen a lot of buzz about, and that's the single point rubric. Thinking about a different way to assess kids, and instead of looking at it as kind of like the game of point collection, let's look at it kind of from a different light. So can you tell us a little bit about the single point rubric if we've never heard of it?
Yes. So this happened. I sort of came up with this, but and then it turned out somebody else had already come up with it, which is so typical. But when I was in a grad program with technology, we had to create these student project. It was supposed to be this 4-column rubric with, you can picture it, it's like 9-point font, and there's like 20 different cells, and they're identifying what a 4 and a 3 and a 2 and a 1 is. And it was just exhausting trying to complete all these. And I had done them out of criteria. This is what we're looking for. And I just remembered thinking, and when I went back and long story, but anyway, I just kept thinking, why don't we just tell students what we're looking for instead of all the different ways that they could fall short? Because whenever I would grade my students with a 4-column rubric, I'd have highlights in all these different places. And I would also be making little notes, because it was like, well, it's not exactly, you did have 2 things that you were supposed to have, but like one of them was kind of off. And to try to explain to them with pre-written language what was wrong was just so hard. And as a student in this same program, we would receive those same types of rubrics. And I can just remember thinking, I'm just going to pay attention to the 3 and the 4 column. I need to know what the target is and what I need to do to sort of exceed it. And I wasn't even reading all of it. And I thought, I know my students aren't reading all of this stuff anyway. And I just thought, why don't we just have the 1 column? And it really should just be called a single column rubric in one obscure paper 15 years ago. And she called it that. So I needed to give her credit for it. And so that's what it was called. But anyway, let's just identify the criteria and then leave some space on the page to explain to the students. We can say you either hit it, or you're a little off, or you're way off. And here's why. And so if you hit it, you just hit it, and that's great. But it just gives us a little bit of room, and then the kids can just breathe and focus on what they're trying to actually achieve, as opposed to, because sometimes, and I've had a lot of teachers say this to me, they'd say, my kids were just going to do that. And they wouldn't even shoot for the higher levels, because they'd be like, okay, all you have to do is this much stuff. And so I'm just going to do that. Yeah. So it's really, really taken off, which makes me feel vindicated, because my graduate professor would not let me do that. She made me do a 4-column rubric.
Oh, that's so sad.
Some people say, no, this is like a checklist. And I really think it could be a checklist depending on the language that you use in it. But it's the same language that you would use in a rubric. If you're describing qualities instead of just, does it have these things, then do that. But a lot of people have said they're using it for evaluate and to evaluate each other prior to ever getting feedback from the teacher. So I don't know if you can do the screen share if you've got the image of it, because I'm explaining it just in language, but it would probably help to have a visual, because I've got 2 versions of it now. And people can download both of these, I believe, right from that.
Yeah. Let me pull this up real quick. And
page. Okay.
Let's see. There. Is this what we're looking for? This?
Well, if you go down, there's a more plain version that doesn't have like all the junk on it. I don't really like that image anymore. It's not there anymore. Oh, you know why? Because all right. I don't know if I can do a screen share, but wait a sec.
Yeah, give it a shot.
I can grab 2 of them. I might need to do a screen share myself.
Okay. I'll go ahead and put mine up there for right now anyway. And, I feel, to kind of piggyback on what you were saying earlier, I feel like, really it's like in the real world, the rubric in some ways to me feels kind of like contrived and inauthentic and kind of forced, in that not a whole lot of places in the real world do you have rubrics like that, where you get a certain score and you have to force everything into those spots. Because even if you go out into the corporate world, or even with teaching and everything, you get evaluations. And I guess our teacher evaluations are kind of like rubrics, maybe just because we're teachers and we use them in the classroom. But so much of that feedback is just like verbal feedback, and it's like tailored specifically to what it is that you need to do to improve. And this, and then for teachers, from the teacher side, it's so hard to create a rubric and to make it fair, and to make it, where whenever you check them off in the right places, then the score that comes out of it and the comments that come out of it is useful and is accurate. And I've just always had so many issues with this, and I'm so glad that this is here, because it does get into, and it sets apart the benchmark. This is like what you were saying earlier. It sets the benchmark of what we're trying to reach. And kind of like what you said earlier, if you have the 1 and the 2 in the 4-point rubric, then it's almost like saying the 1 and the 2 is an option that you can take, you know? And I think that it's kind of like there's a mental, or kind of like a psychological message that we're sending kids, that if this is what we have on the rubric and this is what you're going to shoot for, then this is what we do. This is what we're looking for. And I think that that's one of the things that I really love about it.
I lost you for a second.
Yeah, sorry. I was just saying that's one of the things that I love about it, is that it does, it does that. It sets up what we want kids to do. So.
Yeah. So can you just explain to me real quick, how do I share my screen? Is it that?
It's the little, it's the green arrow.
The green arrow.
Hit that,
okay.
It should be in the toolbar on the far right.
So the one that you showed has the criteria down the middle, and then it's got an area on the left for giving feedback about problems, and an area on the right for giving feedback about how you have, exceeded the standards.
Right.
Right, like that. And, a lot of people have had different kinds of language that they use along the top. Some people like to say not yet instead of concerns. And so that's all obviously very flexible. But the idea is that you have room for giving feedback. So one of the things that I added say that with a caveat, because there are a lot of people who do not want there to be. Okay, can you see this?
Yes. Yeah, I just switched over to you, so now everybody sees yours.
So we've got one column here just for the criteria, and then space for a 4, 3, 2, 1 or ABCD or whatever it is, and then space for written feedback, positive or constructive. People who are going gradeless, or who are working in a hybrid system where they don't really want to give grades until the very end of a project, they could always just leave this blank and just go with straight up feedback at first, and then come back later, or even have the student decide where they think they are. But the idea is just to sort of indicate where you are. I mean, this could be a plus, minus, plus, whatever. You can use anything in this area, but it's just to let them know kind of where they are. And, there are a lot of different philosophical, how do I stop sharing?
You just did. You got it. We see your smiling face now. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, I mean, I experiment with that stuff, I've had a guest blogger who came on, and she talked a lot about students who don't read the written comments on their essays. And she's got this great system where she hands back the essays to students with the written comments on them and no grade at all. And students have to sit for like 15 minutes, you're out, kind of, they self-assess, but they've got the feedback. So they're really reading that feedback. And then they have a conference with their teacher about what she thought their score was. But they kind of have to grade themselves on that rubric first. So it really makes them think through how they did, what areas they were falling short on. And they're just much more invested in the language of that rubric then.
Yeah.
And I just think if you're just more likely to pay attention to it and understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Oh my goodness, this is all such good stuff. So we're starting to come to a close here, and I wanted to touch on, since we've just got a few minutes left here, we've been talking about some things to do. One other thing that you've written about, and I'm sure talked about, are some things not to do. And of course, whenever we tell people don't do this, it's not usually as helpful if we don't tell them what to do instead. Which is what I really like about where I want to go next on this. And you wrote a post a little while back called 5 Common Teaching Practices I'm Kicking to the Curb. And so you've got a bunch of them here. And what I love about it, and we'll have a link to this in the resources for this session at ditchsummit.com. What I love about it is that you name it, you say what it is, you say why you did it. So like owning the fact that you've done them before too, which, I'm right with you, what the research says, and then what to do instead. And then you've got some additional links. And so there's a variety of these here, including popcorn reading, giving students prepared notes, whole class punishments, using learning styles to plan instruction, and then quote unquote differentiating by having advanced students help struggling students or peer tutoring. And so those are the 5 on the post. So to kind of wrap up this entire presentation here, I was wondering if you might pick one of those out in particular and just kind of tell us what you remember about it and the things that strike you about it.
Yes. You want me to choose one of them?
Yes, please.
Okay. Oh, that's hard.
So
what I will say about all of these is that I feel like none of them are like absolute, you should never, ever be understood. Because what has happened in the last, I don't know how many years, 5, 10 years or something, basically more and more people are coming out saying there really is no research out there to support the idea that people have these sort of discrete learning styles. Like, I'm just an auditory learner, I'm just a visual learner. And their point is that it's not necessarily that it's harmful to plan lessons that way or to try to reach, these different modalities. But I think too much energy and time are being spent on that. I know when I worked with student teachers, I was like, how are you going to be reaching your visual learners? And then what are you going to do? And we were looking for like tests and stuff that would try to identify. Doing is sort of teaching everyone to all modalities. You should be doing things that are more hands-on. Right. You should be doing things that are visual and also saying stuff that's auditory. And so the energy that we're spending on trying to, codify all of our kids and then teach in all these different ways, it's just energy that could be way better spent. Coming up, that's probably the most misunderstood one out of those 5.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I'd go back to the whole thing. Cause I mean, there's the whole class punishments too. It's just, I did that too. I did it all the time. And now I see my own kids coming home, just missing recess every day. And I'm like,
yes. Oh man.
To get out there.
And when you rob kids, oh my goodness, when you rob kids of recess, I'm going to go back to that. And I understand. It's like what you said. I understand why teachers do it. And it's like, you've got to feel like you're regaining a sense of control. And there's so many kids sometimes that are doing things that you want to send a message, but there are so many root causes of all of that. And it makes me think of trying to weed your garden by plucking the head off of a dandelion. It's like the roots are still down there. It's going to grow back. And if you don't dig out the roots, I really feel like, robbing kids of recess, which, you and I both know that the research says that kids, especially younger kids, need recess, and that physical activity boosts their cognitive function, and they will be better learners in the afternoon because they had recess in the afternoon. It's just, it's so counterproductive. And I think a lot of times we don't realize it. And sometimes we don't have good strategies on how to combat it. And so I'm right there with you.
Yeah. One of the things I have recommended in the past, I think when teachers dig themselves a hole, sometimes we make a threat that we think sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Surely they're not going to do, and then they do the thing. And now we have to do the thing that we said we're going to do, which is not good. So I'm all for making vague threats to students. If we just say, if you do this, I am going to make your lives miserable for a little while. And so then you've not promised anything or threatened anything in general. Just, you're going to be sorry. And that way, that buys you a little bit of time to come up with something that is smarter. Sometimes we punish ourselves. We take away your kids read with a bunch of really rowdy kids who need to be outside. And now you're like, great, I just also lost some free time for myself. So great.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, this has been amazing. This is everything that I hope that I keep saying that in these sessions. This is everything that I hope that it would be. And it really was. And if people aren't checking out your blog on a regular basis, if they're not subscribed to the Cult of Pedagogy podcast, they have my highest recommendation. I really think, and I've listened to a lot of education podcasts out there, I really think the Cult of Pedagogy podcast is my favorite education podcast, hands down. And I'm not just saying that because we're here face to face in a video chat. That really is my favorite one, just because of all of the thought that goes into every single episode, and it's so well thought out and presented and everything. And so, definitely check that out. If people want to stay in touch with you and find out all of the good stuff that you're doing, what's the best way to do it?
So if they come to cultofpedagogy.com and they just go to subscribe, I think that's in the top corner. There's either about here, or let me just make sure subscribe to my to subscribe. I send out an email every Sunday, basically that either will say, here is the blog post that I wrote for you, or here's the podcast episode, or here's some other stuff that I think you should be paying attention to. And I try to keep it really short and, not necessarily always that professional. And so,
which is good.
Yeah. So, that would be the best way.
Okay, wonderful. This has been great. Thank you again so much for coming on and being on this. And again, of course, thank you for watching and for being a part of the QCraft Ditch Summit. Of course, we want to thank Adobe and Adobe Spark, our sponsors, who have a great product that help us do some of that great creative, creation type stuff that we can do in the classroom. So we're very thankful to them, and we're looking forward to seeing you on another session. So again, Jen, thanks so much for being on this presentation.
Thank you, Matt. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.